When you hear the phrase biological invasion, your mind probably jumps straight to those terrifying lists, right?
Yeah.
The infamous 100 of the world's worst invasive
Yeah,
species.
exactly.
We treat the species itself, the zebra mussel, the killer shrimp, like this monolithic villain.
Right.
The assumption is once invasive, always globally invasive, no matter where it lands.
And well, that assumption is the policy bedrock we've built, massive global mitigation strategies on. It's the classic species-level risk assessment thinking.
Mm,
But if we pause for a second and think back to basic evolutionary ecology,
mm,
I mean, that idea runs directly counter to natural selection, doesn't it?
it really does.
How can a single species behave identically across dozens of drastically different local environments, habitats, climate regimes? It doesn't quite add up.
Okay, let's unpack this then, because that simple contradiction, well, it's the starting point for a really critical deep dive today.
Mm-hmm.
We are looking at a pretty revolutionary paper published in Global Change Biology that meticulously scrutinizes this traditional generalized view.
Yeah, it really digs in.
Our mission today is to show you the paper's core finding. Biological invasions aren't really a species-level threat. They're more of a population-level phenomenon, driven by local adaptation.
And this shift in perspective is frankly urgently needed. Biological invasions are accelerating, costing governments and industries billions, annually.
Yeah, the costs are huge.
And they are major drivers of biodiversity loss, ecosystem disruption.
Hmm.
But if our current strategies, these broad denialists and global risk assessments, if they ignore the actual on-the-ground reality of local adaptation,
Then they're not working properly.
they're not just inefficient. They are leading to a massive misallocation of conservation resources. That's the real worry.
So the core thesis here is that invasion success hinges entirely on intraspecific variation, meaning differences within the same species.
Exactly.
It's about how different populations of, say, the zebra mussel adapt to a river in France versus maybe a lake in Germany.
Right. It's evolution in action, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the study argues that invasion science, well, it has to evolve with it. It's bringing that evolutionary theory back into management practice.
To prove this point, they didn't just rely on theoretical modeling. They actually dug into decades of real-world data. Tell us about the sheer scale of this analysis they performed.
Oh, it was a Herculean effort, really.
Yeah.
Centered in Europe. They compiled and analyzed this huge database of freshwater macroinvertebrates. The data spans from 1968 all the way up to 2020.
Wow, that's over 50 years of data.
Yeah, it means they analyzed 1,816 different long-term time series across 22 European countries. They were looking for true long-term performance, not just snapshots.
And they focused on 6 main model organisms, right? Many of which are pretty infamous in the non-native species world.
Absolutely, yeah. We're
What?
talking about the New Zealand mud snail, Potamopyragus anapoderum,
Yeah.
the zebra mussel, Dracena polymorpha, the notorious killer shrimp, Dichorogammarus villosus, plus Crangonix pseudogracilis, the bladder snail, Physella cuta, and the gravel snail, Lithoglephus naticoides. These are basically the poster children of freshwater invasion in Europe.
Got it. So how did they take these 6 species and actually measure their local true invasiveness? They used, what, 3 analytical pillars?
Yeah, 3 interconnected pillars to compare those policy expectations against the ecological reality on the ground.
Okay.
So the first pillar was spreading speed. How quickly does a population, once it's established, actually move across the map? They measured this in kilometers per year.
Right. Makes sense.
The second was abundance trends. Using some pretty rigorous statistical analysis, they tracked whether population numbers were robustly growing, declining, or, just remaining neutral over decades.
And the third pillar, that's the one that ties it all together, the discrepancy check.
That's the management test, exactly. They took their real-world spread and abundance data and compared it directly against those traditional, rigid species-level risk assessments, specifically using the ASISK tool.
Ah, the ASISK.
Yeah, and this tool, which relies mostly on a species' potential traits, uses a calibrated global threshold 13.25 to categorize any freshwater invertebrate above that score as high risk, period.
That comparison is the key then. Let's jump into finding 1, the variable rate of spread. If a species were truly monolithic, like we discussed, you'd expect it to saturate a similar environment at a similar rate. But that's not what they found.
Not at all, no. They modeled the long-term spread speed using what's called an inverse power law function. Now, don't worry too much about the stats.
Okay, good.
Just focus on the core output. This exponent, alpha, they use the Greek letter alpha.
Okay, simplify alpha for us. What is it telling the average person listening?
Well, think of alpha as the population's momentum index. sort of. If the alpha value is low, say closer to 0, that means the rate of spread slows down very, very gradually over time.
Right.
The population is like a train with almost unstoppable momentum. It just keeps rolling into new territory for decades.
Okay, sustained spread.
Exactly. But if the alpha value is high, say, above 2, that momentum gets killed off quickly. The population hits some kind of geographical or ecological barrier and basically stops almost immediately.
What's fascinating here, then, is the sheer inconsistency of this momentum index for the same species across different regions.
It was startling, honestly. Look at the New Zealand mud snail, P. antipanarum. Its alpha value, its long-term spread, momentum ranged drastically from a near unstoppable low of 0.09 in Sweden
Wow.
to a rapid, pretty short-lived spread of 1.32 in Belgium.
Wait, hold on. Same species, but one population basically rolled almost forever and another just stopped relatively quickly.
Exactly that. And the bladder snail, Ficella acuta, showed an even wider range. It went from 0.26 in the UK, which means slow, sustained spread, all the way up to a massive 4.40 in Greece.
Yeah.
That indicates the spread speed declined almost instantly there. This variability, I mean, that's the smoking gun.
Yeah, you can't ignore that difference. The overall pattern they identified was also pretty sobering, wasn't it? Like 74% of the population studied had an alpha value below 1.
That's right, which means their spread momentum declines relatively slowly over the long term. They're basically settling in for the long haul in most places they establish.
So this huge regional disparity really proves the case. Invasion success is overwhelmingly context-dependent.
Absolutely. It's not the species' genetic blueprint alone that dictates success, it's the local conditions. Things like population density, habitat barriers, maybe the specific genetic makeup of that founding population, or even human-induced dispersal pathways. Those are what drive the outcome.
That regional variability and speed then leads us right to the next big surprise, finding 2. Abundance trends. Because here's where it gets, well, really interesting for management. When managers characterize an invasion, they often assume this continuous positive trend. The population just grows and grows, and the problem gets worse and worse.
That's the generalized narrative, absolutely. But the data show the reality was far, far murkier. They looked at 228 specific abundance trends over time. Do you know how many were statistically significant positive trends, meaning the population was definitively increasing?
I'm guessing not many, based on where this is going.
Only 12.
12 out of 228. That's barely 5%.
Exactly. The vast majority, 208 of them, were classified as non-significant or neutral.
Wow.
This fundamentally contradicts the assumption that every established invasive population is continuously increasing its threat level. Many populations, maybe after an initial burst, they simply peak and stabilize, or sometimes even slowly decline in certain areas.
And the key to understanding why this happens, you argue, lies in their meta-regression analysis, which looked at heterogeneity. This is where the local chaos comes in.
Correct. The analysis measured heterogeneity using the Twi-Taller-2 statistic. You can think of I-Taller-2 as like the ecological chaos index.
Okay, I like that. Ecological chaos index.
Yeah, it tells you what percentage of the observed variation in population trends is due to real, actual differences between the study sites, rather than just, random measurement error. A high I-120ers means highly unpredictable, context-specific behavior.
And the chaos index was through the roof in some places, wasn't it?
Absolutely. The killer shrimp, Dicerogammarus villosus, in France, had an astonishing I-202s of over 85%. That's massive heterogeneity.
85%.
Yeah. Even the New Zealand mud snail in the UK showed significant heterogeneity at around 41.84%. This high chaos index, it's like the fingerprint of local environmental selection pressure.
So the factors driving this local outcome could be things like the genetic bottleneck during transport.
Could be.
Or the alley effect, which is when a population is too small to reproduce efficiently and just fizzles out.
Right, establishment failure.
Or maybe just long lag phases where a population is kind of sitting low, adapting its specific genetic makeup before it can really take off and exploit a niche.
Precisely. It's the local environment, not just the species' general traits, that dictates the outcome. It's the difference between seeing a species on a global wanted poster,
Yeah.
and recognizing that its local population might actually be starving and failing to reproduce effectively in one specific European waterway. The reality can be very different.
Okay, now we arrive at probably the biggest conflict this paper highlights. The management disconnect. You have this messy, variable population-level reality running up against these rigid species-level risk assessments.
And the comparison is, well, It's pretty unforgiving. The basic risk assessment, or BRA scores, they categorized 5 out of the 6 studied species as universal high risk.
Meaning they all scored well above that 13.25 threshold we mentioned.
Policy is focused on the species' potential to cause harm based on its traits, not its actual local performance over time.
But this is exactly where resource allocation goes wrong, isn't it? You have species universally labeled high risk, even when your data show their population trends on the ground are flat or non-significant in certain regions.
That's the crux of the argument, yes. Take Potamopyrgus antepidarum, the New Zealand mud snail again. Its BRA score was high risk, 29 points, way above the threshold.
Okay.
Yet in many specific locations looked at in the study, its long-term abundance trend was neutral. So managers are pressured to spend heavily fighting a high-risk species that locally might have already peaked and stabilized.
This sounds like a huge policy paradox, but isn't the whole point of a global risk assessment, like ASISK, to set a kind of universal safety floor, to be precautionary?
That's a valid point.
If we switch entirely to just population-level monitoring, aren't we maybe just opening the door to localized, perhaps even political decision-making instead of sticking to hard science across the board?
That's a really important concern, and it's why the paper doesn't advocate for just abandoning risk assessments entirely. It's more about integrating real-time data into them.
Ah, okay.
They did include the future component of risk, too, the climate change assessment, or CCA, and that adds another layer.
Right, the climate change overlay.
For instance, the combined BRA plus CCA scores predicted a heightened future risk for the zebra mussel, Dreissena polymorpha, in places like Germany and the Netherlands because of warming waters, etc.
Okay, so even if the current abundance trend is flat.
Exactly. Even if it's flat now, the future potential risk might still be very high under changing conditions.
So we have to somehow balance this immediate, flat, observational data with these future, highly predicted risks, even when the underlying species-level score seems so inflexible today.
Precisely. The species-level score might be good for predicting future potential under stress, but maybe it's less good for assessing current impact or guiding immediate action efficiently. The key is marrying the two somehow.
Okay. So what does this all mean, then, for the future of invasion ecology and management? The paper really urges a massive conceptual and practical shift, doesn't it?
It does. They urge a transition away from relying solely on broad species-level assessments, which often use somewhat arbitrary criteria, towards more adaptive, region-specific, and population-focused framework.
Right.
The comparative analysis they included in the paper, I think it was a table 2, laid out the trade-off perfectly.
Okay, let's quickly run down the pros and cons of these two management styles, because this is really where the policy decision lies, isn't it? Why do countries tend to stick to the species-level approach?
Well, fundamentally because it's accessible and relatively easy to implement. It's less resource-intensive. It's excellent for initial broad prevention at borders, for example.
Right, screening.
And it's streamlined for policy and law across large jurisdictions like the European Union. Makes things consistent on paper.
But the cons, as we've discussed, are major.
Yeah, the cons are significant. It oversimplifies the dynamics, ignores local genetic diversity and adaptation, and critically, it can lead to massive misallocation of funds fighting battles that maybe aren't the highest priority locally.
And the population-level approach, the one that relies on tracking that ecological chaos index, it's scientifically superior, clearly more accurate.
Yes.
But it comes with a massive operational burden.
The pros are obvious. Accuracy, accounting for local conditions, making sure you're fighting the right fight in the right place. But the cons are all about resource intensity. It demands significantly higher investment in long-term data collection, boots on the ground, human monitoring, complex analysis. It's just harder to interpret sometimes and much harder to translate into simple rules across vast geopolitical regions.
So the proposed alternative seems to be this idea of an adaptive management approach, sort of a middle ground.
Yes, essentially an adaptive cycle. Initial risk assessments are still necessary, for that precautionary screening.
Okay.
But management measures must then be based on comparing the situation to similar invasive non-native populations. Same species, same habitat type, similar context. And crucially, those measures must be updated dynamically based on real-time population trend evaluations.
So if the trend is neutral, maybe you scale back the management effort in that location.
Exactly. Or if the spread momentum, that alpha value, is really low, you know it's going to keep spreading, so you invest heavily in sustained containment efforts there. It's about tailoring the response.
Okay, so we've established that the core of invasion science really should rely more on population dynamics because these general species assessments, they just overlook too much intraspecific variability, local context.
Right.
The science seems clear that population level data is better, more informative for actual management, but it is astronomically expensive and complex to gather and maintain consistently everywhere.
And that's the fundamental challenge, isn't it, for policymakers going forward? Given that the population-level approach is fundamentally more accurate but significantly more resource-intensive,
Yeah.
does a true, effective global framework for managing biological invasions require a massive international commitment, a commitment to far more detailed long-term local monitoring than currently exists?
Or will policy continue to choose what's accessible and simple over what's ecologically accurate, risking, ineffective management just for the sake of simplicity and lower upfront cost?
That's the big question, something for you, the listener, to consider the next time you hear about a species on the worst invasives list. Is the threat universal, or is it playing out differently right in your own backyard?